Welcome to this lesson on developing CSR policy. Organizations may find it easy to make public commitments to CSR, but actually developing policies which are agreed and can be implemented across the organization can be challenging. Here, we examine steps you can take to develop CSR policies which can be enacted and supported by key stakeholders. CSR commitments are policies or instruments a firm develops or signs on to indicate what the firm intends to do to address its social and environmental impacts. CSR commitments flow from the CSR assessment and strategy, and are developed at the point when a firm moves from planning to doing. CSR commitments ensure that the firm's corporate culture is consistent with CSR values. They help align and integrate the firm's business strategy, objectives and goals. They also provide guidance to employees about how they should conduct themselves. And they communicate the firm's CSR approach to business partners, suppliers, communities, governments, the general public and others. Before developing CSR commitments, firms must understand the range of available commitments and the distinctions between them. Our key distinction is between aspirational and prescriptive commitments. The main objective of aspirational commitments is to articulate a high level and common understanding of what a firm stands for and how it would like to be regarded. For CSR to be truly integrated into values, decision-making and activities, our firm's aspirational commitments must fully reflect its social and environmental positions. Aspirational commitments tend to articulate the long-term goals of a firm and are usually written in general language, while prescriptive commitments, such as codes of conduct, stipulate more specific behaviors to which the firm explicitly agrees to comply. Aspirational commitments often take the form of vision, mission, values and ethics statements, or charters. In many circumstances, firms may already have aspirational and prescriptive commitments in place that can be adjusted to fully integrate CSR. Aspirational commitments form the backdrop for specific and prescriptive codes of conduct and standards, which are usually designed to benchmark or directly control behavior. Prescriptive commitments, typically taking the form of codes of conduct and standards, set out specific behavior changes for which a firm agrees to strive. Our firm may choose to develop its own code of conduct, or to sign on to an existing sectoral code or standard, for example the Responsible Care Initiative, or some other existing instrument. A main advantage for a firm developing its own code of conduct is that the code can be tailored to reflect the firm's circumstances. On the other hand, developing a code of conduct can be a lengthy and expensive process, and the end product may not have the credibility of a third-party code, especially those that are derived from existing international norms. In other circumstances, it may be to the firm's advantage to partner with others within the sector, or across sectors, to develop a code of conduct that addresses specific issues. In Malawi, for example, a code of conduct on fighting corruption was developed on a private sector initiative, together with the UN Global Compact. There are many third-party, CSR-related codes and standards, with which firms may choose to comply. Such codes and standards are often linked to third-party verification or certification labeling programs. In this last context, it should be noted that the use of a labeling approach might only be effective when part of a wider CSR strategy. Careful examination of a code's terms at the outset, to make sure they are compatible with the firm's mission, culture and activities, can reduce the likelihood of later programs failing. There is often a significant investment necessary for firms to get up to code. CSR commitments make it clear to all interested parties what they can expect from a firm. By articulating these expectations up front, the firm decreases the potential for misunderstandings at a later date. In this sense, CSR commitments can improve the quality of the involvement the firm has with its stakeholders. In some cases, in fact, stakeholders will only agree to engage with firms that have clearly stated their CSR commitments. Another benefit of CSR commitments is that they can play a key role in integrating diverse organizations. In 2002, the aluminium products and services firm Orkney Incorporated published a revised version of its worldwide Code of Employee and Business Conduct, with which all employees, consultants and suppliers are expected to comply. The code covers human rights, the environment, health and safety, competition, improper payments, workplace harassment, and shareholder, media and community relations. A set of shared values supplements the code, highlighting the importance of integrity, accountability and transparency. For more information, go to www.orcon.com. Here is one way of developing CSR commitments. First, do a scan of existing CSR commitments. Next, hold discussions with major stakeholders. You may want to create a working group to develop the commitments. Then, prepare a preliminary draft and consult with affected stakeholders. Finally, revise and publish the commitments. Let's look briefly at each of these. Before developing CSR commitments, or agreeing to adhere to third-party CSR codes or standards, it is useful to examine the CSR commitment instruments others are using. Importantly, firms should also research CSR instruments developed by governments and intergovernmental bodies such as the UN, the ILO and the OECD, for example, the Global Reporting Initiative. These instruments have a high level of credibility and are good guides to what governments consider to be acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. When considering the CSR commitment instruments of others, it is useful to ask questions, such as the following: what are the objectives underlying development of these CSR commitments? Are those objectives the same as, or different from those, underlying the firm's CSR objectives? What are the potential costs, drawbacks and benefits of the various types of commitments? What is the applicability or suitability of these commitments to the organization, in light of its scope of activities and geographic range of operations? And finally, will your company benefit from the commitments, and how? Next, hold discussions with major stakeholders. Within the company, it is critical that the board, CEO and top management be firmly behind a company's CSR commitments. Similarly, early and meaningful input from and support of the firm's personnel is very important. Employees possess frontline knowledge of the problems the organization faces, and ultimately will play a critical role in implementation. There may also be value in having informal initial discussions with business partners, supply chain members and other contractors. The objective of these discussions would be to sound these parties out about which commitments to choose and to identify partners willing to help develop them. When the commitments apply to these parties, their involvement and agreement to comply with the terms of the commitments are crucial. It can also be useful to reach out to more broadly affected groups, such as consumer, labor and environmental organizations, community groups and governments. Next, create a working group to develop the commitments. The working group should be a cross-section of the organization, from senior management to frontline employees. Contractors and others, to whom the commitments apply, should also be involved. Having the right people in the group is essential. They must be dependable, credible and knowledgeable, and have the necessary time and resources to commit to the work involved. Frank discussion should take place at the outset about the group's objectives, members' responsibilities, anticipated workload and outcomes, and the ground rules on how the group will operate. Regular two-way communication between the working group and the firm as a whole may also be useful. Next, prepare a preliminary draft. CSR commitments should be plain language statements and should contain clear and concise obligations. It is recommended that working group members identify who within the organization will be responsible for implementing the commitments and involve them in preparing the draft. Remember the saying, keep it simple, stupid. Next, consult with affected stakeholders. Start with the people most likely to be directly affected by the CSR commitments and who are already aware of the associated issues. Next, the working group could have more formal discussions with groups and people who may not be aware of the CSR initiative. A consultation plan should include roles for high-profile officials within the firm who have good communication skills and can clearly explain the CSR commitments and receive feedback. This feedback should go to the working group, who will discuss how and to what extent the final draft will reflect the comments. Finally, revise and publish the commitments. Drawing on the input from the consultations, the working group can finalize commitments to be published and shared with all employees as part of the implementation. Often this is done on the firm's website, or in a CSR or sustainability report, but there are many options. The Canadian mining firm Teck prints its commitments on its business cards, which it gives to all employees. It also has a Charter of Corporate Responsibility posted on its website. Your organization may have some established CSR policies in place, in which case, your task will be to evaluate their efficacy, and based on the self-assessment, identify and develop the areas in which you need further CSR policies. To do this, we suggest you do a scan of CSR commitments, hold discussions with major stakeholders, create a working group to develop the commitments, prepare a preliminary draft, consult with affected stakeholders, and revise and publish the commitments.
Want to learn more about this subject? Then click on our website to view the full course. Why not subscribe and get access to free articles and special offers? Join the Global Career Highway now.